Okay, I think I'd like to introduce Ron and Ann Surace for their program. I originally received a sample CD of this music, and I couldn't stop playing it. It was so beautiful and so fun. So you are in for a real treat today. And Moody Bible Institute is recording this. So if the recording turns out to the high expectations, then we will have this information on the website. And so look for their names on the website, because maybe you could pick this up for people who have missed this wonderful performance. So Ron, just some background for him. He is an instructor of piano at the Music Institute in Chicago. He directs the popular 17-piece big band In Full Swing. He won the Silver Award and the Outstanding Musical Performance Award at the Downbeat Magazine Festival, Fest USA National Finals in Oakland, California. He has recorded for Columbia Pictures and Southport Records. There are so many other things, but I wanted to just highlight he studied jazz piano with legendary George Shearing. In addition to a lifetime of jazz experience, Dr. Surace holds a DMA in classical piano performance from the University of Cincinnati, a Master's of Music from Northwestern University, Bachelor's of Music from Oberlin, and a Bachelor of Music Education from Kent State. Ann Surace enjoys performing her husband's solo and piano duo compositions. She has also collaborated as a soprano soloist for his award-winning art songs. In his opera Wonderland, she sang the role of Alice. She also earned her Master's in Music piano performance under, I think it's Guy Mumberts at Northwestern University, where she taught in the preparatory department with Guy Duckworth. As a young adult, she won the Farewell Piano Competition and was a finalist in the National Association of Teachers of Singing Voice auditions at the graduate level. Many of her students have won prizes in competitions, several state winners with the AMTA Mason and Hamlin High School auditions and the AMTA Baldwin competitions. Many of her students have also won college scholarships in piano. So let's welcome Ron and Ann Surace.
I'd like to start by thanking the Illinois State Teachers Association for inviting us here in the first place. The second statement I'd like to make is this is theater music, and it starts out sort of what I would call pedestrian and conventional, and as we progress, it will become more involved. We hope you like it.
piece we just played for you is called I Am Determined because the composer was inspired by Pinocchio's attitude. He was a determined little puppet who ignored all good advice from his father or from the good fairy or from his conscience and just proceeded to go along merrily on his own way. And so to capture that, Ron used this relentless ostinato pattern that kind of reflects that. Now the next piece we're going to do is based on a song, and the song is sung by a boy with an attitude, a very incorrigible juvenile delinquent named Candlewick. And Candlewick is convincing Pinocchio to run away from home, skip school, and go off with him to the land of the boobies, where no one ever has to work. They can play games all day long, and there is no more school. There's no more school, there's no more teachers, there ain't any books, where's a better country? On Thursday there is never school, and every week has 6 Thursdays.
was 10 years old, I was in a class in my school that made puppets. And it was a wonderful experience because whoever was the instructor saw to it that we did a good job with it. The materials were brought to us, so forth. And my mom contributed to it by sewing clothes for this puppet. The puppet was 2.5, 3 feet tall. It had leaded feet. It had dolls for, wooden dolls for arms, and its body was made of balsa wood of some sort, and it had paper mache for a face, which we sculpted in the class. It was just a wonderful experience. But why I'm saying this to you now is because it was at that time I realized that puppets are put together with eye hooks. From each doll, there's a little eye that you screw into the one part, and then you put the other part, another eye screw into it, and that's what makes the moving parts such as they are. And we had a stick to do the legs, one on the right, and the left hand did the rest of the body. But I realized at that time that when I would run the puppet, it would be sort of here and there and everywhere at the same time. It didn't resemble anything human. Its movements were not graceful. It was, after all, a wooden puppet. So therefore, when I wrote this piece, and it's put together based on a major triad, and Anne's going to play the theme that I chose, the first theme. Yes, ma'am. And there's a second that's based on the same thing. Yes, and that was so successful, I thought, well, this just might work for a puppet. And so I decided to take those notes that were in that little motive and augment it and use it as a basso continuo, or I should say a bass that has an extended line. Quarter note became a whole note. A quarter note became a whole. Sounds like this.
You want to show the second theme first, because that's more than. You want me to show the second main theme?
Here's the second theme right now. And this is the augmentation of that line. That worked out so well, I decided to harmonize that line with these magnificent quartal harmony chords.
read from the original Pinocchio book by Collodi. This is I Promise You. "Oh, I am sick of being a puppet," cried Pinocchio, giving himself a slap. "It is time that I become a man." The good fairy replied, "You will become one by learning to be an obedient boy who always speaks the truth and willingly goes to school." "School gives me a pain all over my body. But I promise you, I will become a good little boy. I will study. I will work. I promise you." I promise you that in the future I'll be a good boy. I promise I will go to school and I will make good grades in academics and deportment and good character. All the boys, when they are bent upon obtaining something, say the same old story. Every boy never fails. Seems like all the time they just say the same old story. But I promise you, I am not like other boys you can see. I am better than all of them. I promise you, I will always tell the truth. I will make you very proud of me. I'll be there for donkey fever. All boys who are lazy and take a dislike to books, to schools, who pass their time in games and diversions, must end sooner or later by becoming transformed into so many little donkeys. You can imagine what Pinocchio felt when he found that during the night his head had grown a magnificent pair of donkey ears. Donkey fever. Pinocchio encounters two very unsavory characters, a wily fox and a sneaky cat. They pretend to make friends with Pinocchio because they figured it out that he has a little bit of money and they want it. So they talk him into going with them to the magical land of the owls, where there's a sacred field. And if you plant your gold coin in the ground in that field, overnight it will magically grow into a wonderful tree laden with gold coins. So this is the song The Land of the Owls, sung by the cat and the fox. In the land of the owls, there is a sacred field called the Field of Miracles. In that field you must dig a little hole. Then you plant into it one gold sovereign. One gold sovereign. Then you cover up the hole with a little bit of dirt. You must water it with 2 pails of water. Then sprinkle it with 2 more pails of water. Then sprinkle it with 2 pinches of salt. Our last number is The Blue Fairy. I'm sure many of you, most of you, are familiar with the Walt Disney masterpiece, Pinocchio, the animated film. I first saw it when I was a little girl, and I remember I fell in love with the Blue Fairy. Remember how beautiful she was with her long golden hair and her flowing, sparkly dress and her magic wand. And I used to lie in bed at night and pray that I would dream about the blue fairy. And then I never got my wish. I always dreamed about this witch, and then the witch turned into my mother. But I'm trying to draw the contrast between Disney's Blue Fairy and our Blue Fairy based on the book. In the Kaladi book, she is nothing like my beautiful Blue Fairy. She's strange and unusual and powerful. And she can do things, turn herself. If you ever read Calvin and Hobbes, how they transmogrify, well, she could transmogrify herself. At the start of the book, she appears as a child with blue hair. And then, later on, she's a peasant woman with blue hair. And there's even a place in the book where she is spied on a mountainside as a goat with blue hair. So her power is strange and wonderful, and she can do anything she wants. And she can also transform a naughty puppet into a real boy if he proves himself worthy. So Ron has taken this character and tried to portray her in a piece for two pianos, and he uses chromaticism, bitonality, synthetic scales. I'm trying to think of some other things he does. It's just strange. You just never know what's going to come next, and it reminds me of the fairy. And what I would suggest is you will not leave here humming this tune, but I hope you'll be able to close your eyes and envision a really wonderful, powerful, strangely beautiful blue fairy. much time he has, but he can answer questions if anybody has them. There's
I was
some,
asked to
and
elaborate on one thing
here's
before
a
we
question back
close
here.
it down. Go ahead.
Somebody raised a hand back here.
Go ahead, please. I just published it myself, but I don't have a publisher. No, I just finished. The ink is still wet on some of it, but I have all the music in digital form, if that's what you're asking. I do not have a publisher yet, but it's available as a digital copy. Any other questions, please? Anybody? If there aren't too many, I'd like to answer one question that was put to me as part of this, my assignment to be here, and that was, what was my question, Ann? What was my question about?
He was supposed to tell you how to inspire your students to compose using
how do I
stories,
compose?
songs, and so forth.
So I thought it'd be worth your time to listen to a few comments I've got to make, because it's kind of interesting, in my case at least. To me, just to open up a blank piece of paper and put it on the piano is a humbling experience, to realize that now it's time for you to compose. And when the students come to me and ask me what to do with, I usually have to start with a lengthy discussion that I don't care to go into here, but I try to tell them that we have to have some idea where we're going. And is this music going to be programmatic, or is it going to be absolute music like a la Mozart? Or is it going to be drama, something like that? They have to decide that first, because they haven't made a decision oftentimes. So how do I compose? One of the things I try to do very hard is to ask myself and answer the question, what am I trying to do here? Am I writing a song? Am I writing a dance? Am I setting a poem? What is this music? What am I trying to write? And of course, after all this lofty talk to myself, I write music and it has nothing to do with any of my concepts of what I thought I was trying to do. But the realization comes to you while you're writing this material that it could fit one of these categories that you have had in your mind. So, oh, this music might sound very good here. I think it was George Gershwin wrote, "Someone to Watch Over Me" as a ragtime piece, It was terrible. So they said, this isn't going to work. Write it as a ballad. So that changed the entire complexion of that song. All of a sudden, we had a gorgeous ballad by Gershwin called "Someone to Watch Over Me," which is, of course, endearing to all of us here and perhaps all over the world. So the material then that you write falls into a category. That's how I compose, and that's why I thought I'd try to answer that question. Something else that might be, those of you who are trying to teach some composition, I have a thought on my mind. I think the student, when they're starting, ought to keep a little notebook of the things, the ideas they do come up with, if they have them. Don't just be discouraged and throw it away and constantly throwing material. If you have some ideas, put them in. Beethoven, after all, had a tremendous book that he carried around with, always jotting ideas down constantly, so we can take a lesson from Beethoven. What is my inheritance, I ask also. What is our inheritance in the 21st century? My land is an avalanche of material comes to us. An avalanche. In Mozart's time, he had the triad. And maybe they'd even add a seventh. And they would put in suspensions and non-chord tones, of course. But it's like, and today we have this, like I say, this mountain of inheritance that have come down to us into the 20th century. Tonality, atonality, bitonality, chants, aleatoric music, functional, non-functional. So we've had just about all that one can imagine at your fingertips as your inheritance. That's your inheritance. We have been given this for the folks who came before us. And as you're all aware, there was a school of musicians that came up and said, we're tired of all of it. We'll go to electronic, and also we'll have an anti-art. We'll just destroy it all. Let's get rid of all Western influence, get rid of all of it, and start again with something entirely different. I can remember as a student of composition, I did musique concrète, which is the sounds of any number of things that you put onto a tape. The sound of you walking on the floor and the sound of crickets, all sorts of things, and you could put it together and make composition. It was sort of an effort to move away from the tradition that has come down to us from Europe, European culture, and to a certain extent even America at this point. I should add also that what's wonderful for you as you're teaching to bring up the idea, these are all common words to us as teachers. There's quartal harmony, which they are very fascinated with, which you can see in the works of Van Dahl and all the modern for children and for intermediate students. But there's also, like I say, there's secundal harmony, which is very exciting, seconds and little chords. And also I use certain elements of jazz improvisation. A lot of the children and not so children love to improvise, and here's an opportunity to include improvisation in your work. The work Ann and I played just a portion of the entire piece. The entire piece is 13 songs plus the little short works that go between. In there I have what's called a figured bass pieces for the voice and chord symbols, popular chord symbols, not like what you'd expect to find in the Baroque period with figured bass. That would be asking too much, I think, for most of my students at least, or any student that I'm familiar with. So having that available to your student, when those who are interested in composition, that insight might help you to interest them and to keep them going. And last but not least, I like to mention to students who are interested in writing music, I said, the form of music can be formal. We can set it up. It can be ABA and all that, ABA, C, ABA, rondo form, and sonata allegro, and all of that. But you can also realize that the form of music can be the poem itself. The text, words almost bring their own structure. Like the Italian camerata, they realize that words, the significance of the word is where the composer picks up his idea and elaborates on this wonderful spiritual element of the music, and the most successful ones do capture that. And so I try to bring that to the student too, that words are a form in themselves. I have a Glenn Gould recording of the Goldberg variation. He tries to explain that, and I got totally lost reading it. But I think what he's trying to say is something like that words are a form of music in themselves. They'll imply some sort of beginning, middle, and end to the composition. With that, I'd like to close and thank you all very much, and thank also the committee that invited us here, my wife, of course. Thank you.